Hello, I'm James Keith Walton. The subject of this conversation is the environment. Richard Nixon created the EPA in the early 1970s. It was perhaps one of his greatest legacies, was creating an agency that was specifically set up to try to clean up the air and clean up the water and preserve our natural resources. It was very successful. We've been able to cut emissions, pollution emissions, dramatically since the 1970s. Excuse me. We've been able to clean up our rivers, a lot of rivers, and we've been able to make them much cleaner than they were. We've been able to do a lot because we decided to do something about it. We set up the agency to do it and called it the EPA. Now, like many agencies, it's not perfect. In many government agencies, it can be abusive. And that's the role of the executive branch, is to make sure the agencies don't go overboard, don't go beating up on the small guy. And that's what the EPA was doing, and I think that's why some of the things the present administration has done is roll back some EPA protections and executive orders signed by the last administration. Well, this back and forth between the parties is tedious after a while. Whenever anybody talked to me about the environment, I always thought in terms of pollution. When I go camping in areas that I've camped in a long time, I see changes in the landscape. I can see the effect of erosion and pollution and degradation of what we have. I read a lot of articles in scientific journals. One thing that really shocked me and bothered me a lot was an article a few years ago about the bacteria in the ocean. See, there's a bacteria that lives in the ocean, and it produces O2, oxygen. And it produces approximately 10% of the oxygen in our atmosphere every year. We put so much plastic and thrown away so much plastic and dumped it into the ocean that it's begun to kill the bacteria. So something that produces, an organism that produces 10% of our oxygen is dying off because we're so stupid we litter, we throw trash into the ocean. We filled up the ocean with trash. They say there's a floating mass of pollution, of trash in the ocean the size of Texas. And I believe it, it's true. I've seen pictures of it. People will argue about that. They say, well, how do you know these pictures are real? I'm like, are you serious? How do you argue with somebody that's completely ignorant of the facts? You can't. So I'm only talking to those people that are, reasonably intelligent and like to read and recognize that we have an issue with the pollution in our country. There's a lot of people who will argue about greenhouse gases and climate change. For years, they've argued about climate change. But now, a lot of people are saying, well, gosh, it does seem like it is warmer than it was. Excuse me. And the facts show that, the statistics show that it is getting warmer. Some people say, listen, we need to sign the Paris Accord to get the planet cleaned up. Now, I've read the Paris Accord. It's not a very long document, so it's an easy read. I've talked to a number of people that have said they think we should join the Paris Accord and sign it. And I've asked them, have you read it? They say, no. So have you read the Kyoto protocols that led up to the Paris Accord? Oh, no, they haven't read that either. But they know it's the right thing to do. Okay, well, I'm not a big fan of signing treaties that we can't live up to. Now, what do I mean by that? We couldn't live up to the treaty of the Paris Accord. Well, plain and simple fact is, an enormous amount of area in the United States is covered with permafrost. In the mid-1990s, studies showed that the permafrost had begun to melt. The planet had warmed up enough that the permafrost was beginning to melt, and as it melts, it begins to decay. And as it decays, it gives off heat, and it gives off what they call methane and CO2, carbon dioxide, and then methane and other gases. Imagine, if you will, that you cut your grass and you rake up the grass and put it in a big pile. And it sits in the back of your yard, and you go out there, after you got a nice sized pile, and you go out there in the fall, and you knock over that pile, or you open up the middle of the pile, it'll be warmer in that pile, in the middle of the pile, than the outside of the pile. And this is an example of how the permafrost and bacteria work, because it's kind of slimy on the inside of that pile. Well, that's the grass being broken down by bacteria, and the byproduct of that bacteria eating the carbon part of that biomass, the grass, is that the bacteria emit heat, and it emits methane, CO2, and other gases. That's just how that works. Well, the permafrost is a huge area of the United States, and this biomass that makes up the permafrost is, from a yard deep to 1,200 yards deep. It's a huge amount of biomass. And the study that I read in the mid-90s said that there was approximately 700 to 1,000 times the amount of CO2 and methane and other gases contained in the biomass than was in the atmosphere at that time. Meaning that if the entire permafrost melted, there'd be 700 times more CO2 and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that's a fact. It's chemistry. That's the way it works. There's no way to stop that reaction. This is part of a cycle that has gone on for millennia. For thousands and thousands of years, the Earth's got hotter and then gotten colder. And then it's gotten hotter and then it's gotten colder. Now, what's different this time? Well, what's different is this time is that we as human beings have added a lot more pollution to the planet. The Industrial Revolution sped up the process. So if we had a cycle that was 5,000 to 10,000 years before, it's been shortened now to about 3,000, 2,500 years. So what is this cycle? How does this cycle end? Well, the permafrost will continue to melt, and it'll continue to give off heat and gases until all the ice caps melt and water floods the permafrost and quenches the reaction. And then that reaction stops. And then it'll get cooler. Slowly the Earth will the more water everywhere will reflect more sun back into space, and there'll be less and less heat, and eventually ice caps and glaciers will form again, and it'll start that process all over again. Now, what's this got to do with the Paris Accord? Well, even if we stopped driving as much as we do, and we shut down all the mills and everything like that, and started using other sources of power, the permafrost is still going to melt and still continue to emit gases. And that's part of the United States, and we're still responsible. We would still be responsible as a country for every bit of greenhouse gases emitted by our country. So if we sign what people have been asking us to do is sign a treaty, to sign a contract that we can never live up to. It'd be like saying, okay, I'll sell you a home, but you can never pay for it, so you'll never own it. Nobody would sign that kind of a deal. Nobody would say, oh, I'm going to buy a car, and I'm going to give you $200 a month, and I'll never pay for it. I'll never own the car. The car will turn into rust and stop driving, but I'll still have to pay. Nobody signs that kind of a contract. And any politician that tells you we should sign that part of a contract, they're getting something on the back end of it. They're probably getting a deal from somebody. They're not telling you the truth. Now, on the other side, those people that say, oh, the earth, the planet isn't warming up. There's no heating effect. Well, that's not true either. That's not science. That's not how it works. We can see that it's getting warmer, and as the ice caps melt, the oceans are going to rise, and the lowlands next to the ocean are going to flood. As it warms up, there's going to be more hurricanes, more devastation. There's going to be more tornadoes. So what's the solution to this? Well, the solution is not to complain about it, but to plan for it. So how do you plan for that? Well, if you have hurricanes wipe out a coastline, don't rebuild it. Move inland, build it there. Just accept the fact that the coastal regions are going to be underwater at some point in time, and accommodate that. Plan for that. That's the only thing to do. There's no other real solution. Complaining about it, fighting about it, that's not going to solve the problem. Can we do anything to solve the problem? Well, as far as the bacteria that produces air, we can all start planting trees. If every family in the United States starts planting 5 trees a year, kind of as a family outing, well, in 20 years, we'll have a significant number more trees. 30, 40 years, we'll have even more. And those will produce oxygen and help make up for the deficit of the bacteria and what is being deforestation that's occurring in other countries. What else can we do? We can rebuild our railroads, put people to work rebuilding the railroads, making movement of goods and products across the country cheaper and more effective and more environmentally sound. We're going to eventually move to all electric vehicles. That's just a matter of time. We should embrace this. Our trade partners, who are big polluters, and the United States is not the biggest polluter. When you talk to people, and a lot of people I've talked to, they think the United States pollutes more than anybody. Well, the fact is, if you look at it per capita, each individual in the United States produces more pollution per capita, per individual, than the rest of other people in the rest of the world. But for total pollution, the United States is not the most polluting country on the planet. China produces 35% of the pollution, new air pollution on the planet, and pollution in general. So that's something to consider, that we've reduced our pollution output, while other countries are increasing their pollution output. So we need to decrease ours more, but we need to push on our trade partners and say, listen, if you want to sell your products here in the United States, you need to start meeting some standards. You need to reduce your pollution. You need to either that or charge more money, and that'll reduce their sales. And they'll comply with this thing. You know, Brazil produces steel. They've got a nice steel, okay steel industry, but they also burn up a lot of their rainforest. So we could say to them, oh, hey, Brazil, we want to build a bunch of new cities in the United States, and we'd like to buy your steel, and we'll give you some money, we'll buy it from you. But if you're going to sell us your steel, you're going to have to show us that you're not burning up the rainforest all the time, and that you're not polluting so much. So if they have steel they want to sell, and they do, then we can coerce them with our market. We can say, okay, well, we can either buy it or we don't have to buy it. Excuse me. Getting a little dry here. So we need to take measured steps, when it comes to how we deal with the environment. We need to start looking at adding some protections, for the environment. We need to look at our personal behaviors. We need to stop using so much pesticide and insecticide. A healthy environment, a healthy ecosystem, has got a variety of bugs and a variety of insects as opposed to just a few. I give an example. I can give an example of a field of soybeans. If you drive past a soybean field, you can look out on a soybean field or a lot of fields, a lot of farm fields, and you look out there and you won't see any weeds. Well, how does that happen? Well, that doesn't happen by chance. It's either been engineered or people have added pesticides and herbicides to the soil to maximize their yield. Well, one way to have more soybeans in a year is to plant more fields in soybeans and use less toxic methods to stop the weeds. Just accept that you're going to have lower yield. See, that would save us adding a bunch of pollutants. Those pollutants end up in the rivers and end up in the streams, end up in the water tables, and eventually, if we keep on polluting the way we do, eventually we won't be able to go up to the faucet in the kitchen and drink the water out of the faucet. You go to a lot of countries, and I've been to China and Korea and parts of Europe, and you don't dare drink the water out of the faucet. It's polluted. They've been there so long, they've polluted it with heavy metals. You can't drink that. They give you bottled water and tell you, don't rinse your mouth out with the water out of the faucet. Use bottled water after you brush your teeth to rinse your mouth out. Why? Because there's too much pollution. So we don't want to be like them. We want to stop that. And so I'm for the environment. I'm for planting trees, but I'm also for people taking responsibility and changing their behaviors. Now, I hope you vote for me and write my name in on the ballot. I'm not going to be on anybody's ballot written, printed up. You're going to have to write my name in. Why is that? Yeah, because I'm spending about $400 to run for president, and I'm not going to owe anybody any favors. That's the difference between me and the other candidates. That, and I'm very honest. I appreciate your vote. I hope you agree with me on the environment. If you do, write my name in. Thank you very much.